Click for IB Biology, photosynthesis, the light-dependent reaction taking the form of non-cyclic photophosphorylation, the events which transform light energy into chemical energy in the photosystems. The chemical energy forms created are reduced coenzymes and ATP, and we will look at photolysis and the creation of atmospheric oxygen. There's a PDF in the description which will allow you to annotate your own notes, and there's a quiz at the end as well linked in there for you to test your understanding. The events are fairly complex, and so I've split them into small sections. So let's begin with number 1, and that is the absorption of light by the photosystems. The absorption of light by the photosystems, and of course in particular the reaction centers of chlorophyll, results in their oxidation, the release of high energy excited electrons, like so. These high energy electrons leave the chlorophyll molecules and indeed the photosystem in an oxidized state, a condition which can't remain. They need to be returned to the ground state for further absorption of light, and we'll look at that process towards the end of this video. Step 2. The released electrons from photosystem 2 are passed to proton pumps in the thylakoid membrane. Be aware that the space surrounding the thylakoids is the stroma, and this is the thylakoid space here. These proton pumps have the effect of pumping hydrogen ions from the stroma into the thylakoid space so that those protons will build up in this space here. Simultaneously, the light absorbed by photosystem 1 releases electrons which are then transported to a molecule called Ferredoxin, which is also embedded in the thylakoid membrane. Step 3. The accumulated protons within this space here creates a high concentration of protons here and a low concentration of protons in the stroma. So in effect we have a concentration gradient. Students who've studied respiration may recognize the next section, which is to do with the enzyme ATP synthase and how the protons will then diffuse through this enzyme structure, causing what is called rotational catalysis and the formation of ATP by this enzyme system. Briefly looking at more detail of this ATP synthase, we can see here the thylakoid concentrated proton causes a rotation of the membrane protein, and that rotation is transmitted to the head of the molecule where there are active sites for ADP and phosphate which engage into the active site, and the rotation catalyzes the formation of the third phosphate bond and ATP. In the presence of light, hence photo, and the addition of phosphate, we have photophosphorylation. You'll recall that the electrons from photosystem 2 in their highly excited state have been transported to Ferredoxin. The energy which is then being passed to the Ferredoxin by these excited electrons is used to associate protons from the stroma with the coenzyme NADP+. Adding the protons to this creates the reduced NADP called NADPH. Students are advised to use these two as a pair, or you can describe this using NADP being transformed into reduced NADP. Recall that our photosystems have been oxidized. In summary, at this point in the presentation, photosystem 2 has created ATP. Photosystem 1 has created reduced coenzyme. To complete the discussion, we need to turn to the oxidized forms of photosystem 1 and 2. Having lost their electrons, they are in an oxidized form. And before they can obtain, before they can absorb light again, they need to get back to the reduced level. So chlorophyll here needs a cheap source of low energy electrons, and here they are. These come from the breakdown of water into hydrogen protons and into oxygen and the electrons. The electrons are used to return photosystem 2 to its what we call its ground state, ready to absorb light again. Photosystem 1 also needs to obtain low energy electrons, and these actually come from the proton pumps which were pumping the hydrogen ions into the space of the thylakoid. So those electrons came from photosystem 2 at a high energy state, gave their energy to the proton pump, and then achieved a low energy state, and now these can be added to photosystem 2 to return that to the ground state of chlorophyll, ready again once more to absorb light. If we briefly take an overview of the process of photolysis, then we recognize that now we know that the oxygen in the atmosphere, which comes from photosynthesis, was actually derived from water in the process which is called photolysis. The buildup of oxygen in the atmosphere as the evolution of photosynthesis occurred, so there were cyanobacter and early plant groups were able to create high levels of oxygen in the atmosphere, and this is known as the Great Oxygen Event. The rock layers suggest that this occurred at 2.4 billion years ago, although very, very recent evidence suggests that there may have been two events, perhaps dated between 2.4 and 2.2 billion years ago, with two peaks of increased atmospheric oxygen. The atmospheric oxygen brought about the oxidation of minerals such as iron, and these have left in the rock colored bands which are the geological evidence of the high levels of oxygen created during the great oxidation events as photosynthesis evolved somewhere between 2.4 and 2.2 billion years ago in the cyanobacter.